jungle? Ba-boom, 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 ba-boom. That's my heart, baby. That's my heart loving you.
Hello, and welcome to the Kongversation. I'm Hyle Russell.
And I am Gibbon. Hello.
Hello. You know, Gibbon, I mentioned the other week here on the Kongversation that we are approaching the 30th anniversary of Donkey Kong Country. This November 24th, Donkey Kong Country turns the big 3-0. And I didn't really do much for the 25th anniversary of Donkey Kong Country, but I am feeling it for this one. This impending anniversary, it feels pretty monumentous. And I want to really acknowledge it more here on the Kongversation. And I said, you know, the Character Witness Espresso episode I did with Dustin, it was kind of the
a good
first
episode.
Thank you. It was kind of the first little baby steps, little ostrich feet towards the 30th anniversary. Like, we're going to sprinkle in
ostrich
more.
Feet aren't little at all.
Well, just work with me here. It was the first kind of acknowledgement on the Kongversation of the impending 30th anniversary of Donkey Kong Country. And I wanted to sprinkle in more content related to that first country game. But
Gotcha.
I was thinking, you know, we had just passed the 30th anniversary of Donkey Kong Country's actual unveiling, which was in late June 1994. And this kind of was under my mental radar a little bit because, you know, usually I have a really great memory about when things happened vis-a-vis Donkey Kong Country, Rare, DKU fandom, because I lived it. I was there. I was part of it. I experienced it. It left a huge impact on me. However, I became a Donkey Kong Country fan the very first time I played Donkey Kong Country. Before then, I wasn't really paying attention. So, late, and we were busy in June anyway. We had a lot going on here at DK Vine with, you know, the game announcements of Stinky Ape Summer 2024. But
True.
I realized we've never discussed that first summer, the summer before Donkey Kong Country came out, when Nintendo unveiled it, when Nintendo really got the industry, especially retailers, excited about this incoming freight train, really, to the Sega half of the Nintendo Sega console wars. And, you know, that whole story is also just kind of glossed over because this kind of dealt the death blow to Sega in those original console wars. But
it was a solid back and forth until this point, basically.
But it's forgotten about because what happened immediately after all of this, the PlayStation came out, and it kind of shifted the narrative. So it's not really discussed that much anyway. And it's never been really discussed all that much, except for a few things here or there by DK Vine. So I thought this would be a really fun episode to do to kind of set the stage for later in the season when we really do our 30th anniversary tributes. So on this episode of The Kongversation, we're going to be talking about Donkey Kong Country in the summer of 1994, but specifically with a focus on the 1994 Summer Consumer Electronics Show, which is where Nintendo first revealed Donkey Kong Country to everybody outside of Nintendo and Rare. So, yeah, join us on this expedition, if you will.
Yes.
To when the world first learned about Donkey Kong Country. Now, before we get into it, on the last episode of The Kongversation, Jeff and I complained quite a bit, actually, about
just a tad.
About the lack of story context for the new features in Season 12 of Sea of Thieves. We specifically discussed how there used to be organic reasons for why the new items, weapons, mechanics that were introduced into the game were there. Like, oh, okay, we have these new tools. This is the actual context for why they're here. This would usually be done through time-limited mini-events facilitated by the character of Lorena. And while the time-limited mini-events for Season 12 of Sea of Thieves were not present, I specifically said that they could have at least updated Lorena's dialogue to reflect this and to give us a little bit of reason why we now have zip lines on the islands, or we have 2 new weapons, or we have bone collars. Well, I just talked about how great my memory was. We completely glossed over, like completely just let it slip out of our brains that they actually did update Lorena's dialogue in Season 12 and did give minor justifications for what was added to the game. We just got so peevish in the moment. We just got so up our own bums that we could not actually remember that, oh no, there was at least a little bit of effort made. Lorena's whole functionality has kind of fallen by the wayside. She doesn't really do much anymore. And so I think we did talk to her, honestly, at the beginning of the season, but we just forgot. And I would like to read Lorena's dialogue really quick for what she said to basically force myself to eat some crow here. So Lorena said, with Flameheart making a return, the weaponsmiths have been busy. Led by Wanda, that's Wanda with an O, by the way, they've crafted new ways to do battle with your enemies. There's a new double-barrel pistol, and I've been helping with the new throwing knives. You'll find both are part of your armory. Scatter shots can be found in all cannonball barrels. You can use it to fire at close quarters and deal 4 damage holes to rival ships. If you want a new way to traverse on your travels, you can fire your harpoon and use it for running along or sliding down. Or you might find a zip line on some islands that'll let you zip down to earth or water without a bump. So, yeah, that's on us, and that's on me specifically. It's an atypical failing of the Kongversation and DK Vine. We're so meticulous about everything. And I pride myself in observing the smaller details, but I did not observe this. So I would like to apologize to everyone at Rare, everyone working on Sea of Thieves, everyone who caught our mistake and was too kind to say anything. I am mortified, and I promise you that I will raise my standards even higher so I don't make such an egregious blunder in the future. I'm sorry, Jem.
It happens to the best of us. It's fine.
Not to me, damn it. This is Donkey Kong journalism. If I was working for the New York Times, maybe this would be acceptable and everybody could have a good laugh. But this is DK Vine. I set my standards up to here, and you can't see because this is audio only, but I'm holding my hand so high right now.
I mean, we can almost hear it.
So anyway, that being said, please give DK Vine money at dkvine.com/Patreon. Maybe I can eventually hire a proofreader, an editor to catch these failings so I don't put them out for the world to see.
I mean, nobody really caught that ahead of time. Multiple people had access to this document.
Yeah, I blame Jeff. If you don't want to just give us money on Patreon, you can buy a shirt at dkvine.com/merchandise.
They're good shirts.
They're great shirts. I'm actually not wearing one today. Usually I wear one for the Kongversation. I wear one of our own shirts.
It's laundry day, so I'm unfortunately not wearing one either.
What I'm wearing today is actually not one of our shirts. I'm wearing a replica of the pre-release Donkey Kong Country shirt that I believe was available at the CES in '94. It's Donkey Kong hugging the Nintendo logo, but it's got the original Donkey Kong Country logo, the pre-release version of it, with the yellow Donkey Kong font, a la Donkey Kong 94 on it. It's a replica recreation, because I wasn't just going to buy an actual 30-year-old shirt. I've had this for a few years now, but yeah, somebody was made a homage to it, I believe, on like Redbubble or one of those shirts. So ordered it, and I like it. It's a nice shirt.
I'm wearing one of the Yeti Conquer shirts.
Oh, that's fine, too. Yeah, the Yeti make quality shirts. But honestly, it's great quality of a shirt that the Yeti makes. Not as high quality as DK Vine's shirts. And I'm serious. They're comfortable. They're durable. I love them. They're like, Hyle, why are you still with TeePublic? Because, you could be earning more elsewhere. I was like, because the quality of the shirt, damn it. Premium textiles. DKMine.com/merchandise. And hello to our live stream. We do live stream these to $5 and up patrons. We have Porygon Hugh in there right now. We're recording this on a Sunday afternoon, so most people probably are out, having cookouts or picnics or beach parties.
I might go out for an ice cream after this.
I will probably collapse in a sweaty heap on my bed for a few hours, and I have to edit this.
I mean, you could do that too, but
I don't want to go to a picnic or a cookout or an ice cream social because I hate food.
Yeah, I know.
But here's what I don't hate. I don't hate Donkey Kong. It's one of my legitimate passions in this world. And it's wild to think there used to be a time, before Donkey Kong Country, before my world was turned upside down. And that ball, that globe, I guess, that represents the world, had quietly begun to roll with the launch of a little game, also in 1994, June 1994, by the street name of Donkey Kong, but most people today know it as Donkey Kong 94. And we talked a little bit about Donkey Kong 94 when we did the Spotlight episode for Mario versus Donkey Kong.
Smidge.
Yeah, actually, like, a good chunk of the episode was just dedicated to talking about Donkey Kong 94 covertly.
Well, yeah. It was kind of important to the topic.
It is. So we did discuss this already, but we have to kind of set the stage, because this is how Nintendo set the stage. They reintroduced the concept of Donkey Kong for an entire generation, really, because honestly, I would have fallen in this window had I not stumbled upon Donkey Kong Classics in KB Toys in the early 90s.
Oh,
because,
man, KB Toys.
Yeah, I didn't know what Donkey Kong was. I was too young to know about the arcade games. I never was exposed to them on the original NES. Like, none of my friends had them, so I didn't know what Donkey Kong was. And I didn't have the parents to educate me on, oh yeah, Donkey Kong came first. Donkey Kong was where Mario originated from. I didn't know any of that. So had I not found Donkey Kong Classics, I wouldn't have known about Donkey Kong. And like, most of my contemporaries didn't know about Donkey Kong. But Donkey Kong 94 came out and really did re-expose the Nintendo generation of the mid-90s to who Donkey Kong was, kind of the context of the franchise. And I feel like it was an instrumental thing, because I don't think Donkey Kong Country would have hit as hard as it did if everyone didn't really have sort of a ground level experience on, yes, this is Donkey Kong.
It was a very smart move of them to do DK94 when they did, because it's just kind of reminded people what was going on and set the scene.
Because so much of Donkey Kong Country is providing that contrast. I talk a little bit about this in a video I'm working on right now, but most people think the story of Donkey Kong Country is King K. Rool steals the bananas. Oh no, we got to get those bananas back. But there's a lot more going on under the surface of Donkey Kong Country. There's the sort of generational challenge posited by Cranky Kong, who is the original Donkey Kong. Cranky Kong, who hates being in this game because he was forced into retirement and longs for the original Donkey Kong games of the 1980s. And without having any of that knowledge beforehand, I don't think the character of Cranky would have meant as much as it did. I don't think the desire to prove him wrong would have really resonated with me to the extent that it did. And so even though I had that knowledge, I know a lot of people didn't. And so I'm really glad that Nintendo was smart about this, and they sort of reestablished Donkey Kong about 5 months beforehand, before anybody knew Donkey Kong Country was actually coming. Donkey Kong hit store shelves along with the Super Game Boy. It launched the Super Game Boy.
They have this habit in retrospect of using Donkey Kong as a vehicle for new technology, whether that's new add-ons and accessories or new graphical stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Donkey Kong is kind of the one they roll it out with, which I think says a lot about their faith in Donkey Kong to be the ambassador for that sort of thing.
I also think it was just a kind of good game to really show off what the Super Game Boy was capable of. I mean, it's probably
also
one
very
of the,
true, yeah.
It's one of the best Super Game Boy enhancements you can get out of probably any Game Boy game of that era.
It helps that it's one of the best Game Boy games, period. And then just to have the additional layer of enhancements from the Super Game Boy, the extra enhanced color palette, enhanced graphic, dynamic border, extra sound clips and stuff that go into it. Just they really went all out on it.
It's really a shame that the preservations of Donkey Kong 94, like the official ones, the Super Game Boy stuff's never included in the package.
Yeah.
And as somebody...
it's because that stuff was on the Super Game Boy itself and not on the Game Boy cartridge.
I know.
So you'd have to
I'm just saying it's a shame that there's no way to have a Super Game Boy version of the Game Boy player for NSO or anything.
I mean, they could.
They could. They could, but they're not. They're not. As somebody who was really just the right age, I was just primed for pretty much anything that came out during this era. And I was just fortunate that Donkey Kong Country did kind of intertwine when I was just at that most susceptible age where I could start really earning allowance, and I could start saving my money and making purchases of my own, in addition to augmenting it with Christmas gifts and birthday gifts and really get what I wanted. And the Super Game Boy was just this amazing thing. I talked about it with Josh when he was last on the show, just how, conning your parents to get something oh, I want a Super Game Boy. Here's why the Super Game Boy is a sound investment for you, my savvy parents. It's because, yes, you have to spend $60 right now, but think of all the money you'll save because I'll be buying Game Boy games instead of Super Nintendo games.
Right on. Clever Hyle.
Then I immediately just start getting Super Nintendo games when, the coast is clear. But, I love the Super Game Boy, and I don't think I would have really enjoyed the Donkey Kong Land games had I not been able to play them on the Super Game Boy, and had that clearer fidelity. And I don't think I went back to my brick Game Boy, at least as far as this is how I'm going to play the games from start to finish. I would take it on the go, of course, but if I actually wanted to sit down and complete a game, it would be on my Super Game Boy.
I played Super Mario Land 1 and Link's Awakening on my old brick Game Boy, but as soon as I got that the clear purple Game Boy Pocket, I never went back. Just much better form factor.
I never got the Game Boy Pocket, and I kind of regret it retroactively just because the Game Boy Pocket was a really, really sleek little machine.
Yeah. I didn't have any console newer than an Atari 2600 until after the N64 was out.
Wow.
But I somehow managed to keep up on my handheld gaming. So I had all the models of Game Boy that came out in the US.
Yeah, this is right before they really started launching the different colors of the Game Boy, the Play It Loud line, as it was known in the West. And then we got the Game Boy Pocket, and then, of course, the Game Boy Color, which I did get. And then, And then as soon as I got a Game Boy Advance SP, I'm just like, all right, I'm handheld now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't need to play it on the TV because this is exactly what I wanted all along. So Donkey Kong was everywhere in June, at least if you were a Nintendo kid. You know, on the cover of Nintendo Power, you had it part and parcel with all the marketing for the Super Game Boy. Like, there was a print ad where you had a giant, like, gorilla hand, I think it's representative of Donkey Kong, holding the Super Nintendo with the Super Game Boy with the Donkey Kong cartridge inside.
And the animated TV ads with Donkey Kong.
Yeah.
And a weird, like, Doc Brown version of Mario for some reason.
That kind of harkens back to the early 80s when there was no model for Mario, and he just appeared differently in all of the Donkey Kong advertisements and art depictions.
Yeah, they just had this Doc Brown version of Mario demonstrating his latest sci-fi invention to Donkey Kong, the Super Game Boy. And it's like, you know what? Sure, why not?
So, from the outside looking in, I was like, oh, it's cool that, you know, Nintendo did something Donkey Kong again. As somebody who was educated on what Donkey Kong was just a couple years before, I was like, oh, okay, it's about time. However, little did anyone outside of Nintendo or Rare know that this was just the opening salvo of Nintendo's far more ambitious plan for 1994. And this is no shade meant towards Donkey Kong 94 or anything inherent to its quality. This is me just saying that Donkey Kong 94 was just part of the plan. It was released when it was to reestablish the brand so we could then have the next evolution of the Donkey Kong
priming
brand.
the pump.
Yeah. This was not just a plan to reestablish Donkey Kong, of course, though. This was also to effectively turn the tide against Sega and the last several years.
To set the scene there, Sega from the 91 to 93 or so, basically all of the 90s up until this summer of 94 had been just dominating the market with Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yeah.
So Nintendo was trying to, and Sonic, of course, was a response to Super Mario Bros. And Super Mario World. So Nintendo was desperately in need of sort of an anti-establishment campaign of their own to sort of out Sonic, I guess.
It really was like Nintendo was on the back foot for the better part of 3 years. And a large part of that was Sega of America's marketing campaign was so effective at capturing the zeitgeist of the era in a way that while Nintendo reestablished the video game market of the 1980s after the video game crash and really became the ubiquitous term for video games. It, you know, your boomer parents would just call it Nintendo. You know, it really did.
Well, not my boomer parents, but they were gamers. So
I mean, yeah, not your geek ass parents, Gibbon. I'm talking about most people's parents who, my dad fucking calling them Mario all the time, as some sort of stubborn act of defiance. But you know, Nintendo was the king in the 1980s, and then Sega really just hit the ground running with the Genesis in the West, because their marketing campaign immediately portrayed Nintendo as antiquated, as childish, as yesterday's news. There's the famous ad of comparing the Super Nintendo's power, and this is all just in marketing, but comparing the Super Nintendo to the Sega Genesis, and to compare it, they would have the Sega Genesis be compared to a sports car. Well, the Super Nintendo playing Super Mario Kart was just this old jalopy.
A coupe.
Yeah. And not fair at all. Not really accurate to what was under the hood, but entirely
the blast processing.
Blast processing. Campaign. Yeah, it was very effective if you were a kid, and you were a kid that was concerned.
I didn't know what that shit meant, but I still remember the advertisement.
If you're a kid concerned about what was cool, and if you have the right system, that kind of stuff messed with your head, and it really made Genesis the edgy counterculture, or I mean, really like culture, but the culture of the early to mid 90s. It was dominated by Sega, and Nintendo felt like it was childish. It felt like it was, if not yesterday's news, then hopelessly out of touch. And this was just all down to marketing, mind you.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was also down to the lineup, because in addition to Sonic, they had stuff like Toe Jam and Earl and Echo the Dolphin, and just sort of other like very next-gen aesthetic stuff like that, whereas Nintendo was still doing Nintendo games.
Well, and there's also elements like the Mortal Kombat home version having blood on the Genesis, while they just have sweat on the Super Nintendo. It really did feel like if you had a Nintendo, you had the baby console. And as somebody who was loyal to Nintendo, because I had an NES and my parents got me a Super Nintendo as a surprise for my birthday. I didn't ask for a Super Nintendo because even I thought that was too big of an ask. And maybe because I was so demure about it, my parents like decided to surprise me with it for my birthday.
That's wild.
I think it was 92 I got a Super Nintendo, but yeah, I was like blown away, and I like played Super Mario World all weekend. But then, you know, you go back to your school and they're just like, oh, you got a Super Nintendo? You should have gotten a Genesis. And I was like, what?
Well, but nobody talked to me at school. I was not a popular kid, so.
So you get defensive. You know, this is where console rivalries, this is where factionalism in gaming really originates from. You still see it today, but it's also
Sega
silly.
Does what Nintendo don't.
Yep. So, like, retailers, those who worked for Nintendo, they were pulling out their hair during this time. And it was just like, why don't we do something? Why don't we fight back? And it took them a while to kind of get their cards in order, get a winning hand, so to speak. But it all came together in 1994. And specifically, it was the 1994 Summer Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago, which ran from June 23rd to June 25th. Now, a little trivia for you, Gibbon. This was the final Summer CES ever. The Consumer Electronics Show is still going on today. We think of it as something that's in the past because with the launch of E3 the following year, E3...
the fabled Electronics Entertainment Expo.
Yeah, what E3 kind of did was it kind of splintered things off, and the video game industry went off with E3, and it kind of left the Consumer Electronics Show behind. So... And who knows, maybe in the future, it'll be reintegrated now that E3 is dead.
Yeah. Consumer Electronics Show just rubbing their hands together at this
Finally.
point.
Yeah, they just, like Nintendo, they bided their time, and they waited. But yeah, for like the first decade of, or longer, I guess since Atari hit the scene, like the Consumer Electronics Show would be the showcase of not just VCRs and I don't know, microwaves, calculators. I don't know, like
home computers.
Yeah. But they would also have the video game consoles, Atari, Nintendo, Sega, and this kind of end after E3 launched and Nintendo was like, well, there's no need to attend the CES anymore because we have more of a targeted crowd here with E3, but the Summer CES was always held in Chicago, and you can kind of see the blueprints of E3s to come in this show in particular, because this was really the bridge between the early 1980s and everything that would come after, not just for Nintendo, but for the video game industry itself. It came after years of Sega walloping Nintendo of America. It was held right before the arrival of Sony PlayStation. And this was that narrow sliver of time in the late to mid early 1990s where Nintendo of America reinvented their image. And you had the Nintendo Ultra 64 being previewed behind closed doors at this show. And then you had the big draw, the big main event on the show floor itself. And it's amazing because I did a lot of research on the 1994 Summer CES before we did this episode. And by and large, most of the information you pull up on it is about Donkey Kong Country. Occasionally you'll find like old tech blogs that weren't focused on video games that make no mention of it. But most articles, most preserved media from that era really at least dedicate some print space to Donkey Kong Country. It's ridiculous. And it's kind of easy to see why, though, given how seismic this was.
Mm-hmm. Looking at the display they had up and just looking at the game itself, it's kind of just like, even from just like a consumer technology standpoint, like Donkey Kong Country was fucking cutting edge shit.
Nobody had ever seen anything like this, especially for a home console.
I don't know how to kind of convey this to all of the Zoomers listening, but like, graphics weren't really a thing in video games up until this point. Like Sega had boasted about their so-called blast processing, but that kind of meant like Sonic could dedicate a level to doing something like their fucking running Pipe Man mini game. Mm-hmm. But that, like, the rest of the game was still like side-scrolling sprites and whatever. Like, but so Donkey Kong Country comes along and it's like a full CG game with fluid animations and dynamic HUD and just like a soundscape like you've never heard before in a video game, and just like the dynamically shifting level palettes and stuff as like the sun sets in the background or the storm rolls in and the snow starts. Like, everything about this game was fucking mind-blowing.
I think that's lost to time. I think that people who have always grown up with superior graphics to Donkey Kong Country don't realize the shift that happened overnight with Donkey Kong Country. And a large part of why we don't even discuss the graphics that much anymore as Donkey Kong Country fans is that was used against us for so many years. Like, oh, you only like Donkey Kong Country because of the fancy graphics, which is what Cranky actually says in the Donkey Kong Land manual. But it became this thing where it's like, no, actually, the game is fucking fun. But
and like... But like, even just on the graphics alone, it put Nintendo in the lead all of a sudden.
It did.
Other things were trying to copy them. Other parts of Nintendo were trying to copy them. Super Mario RPG looks the way it does because of Donkey Kong Country.
Yeah.
Sonic immediately shifted to trying to do that sort of thing in like 3D, in Sonic 3D Blast. And other like studios and companies started trying to do the 3D rendered stuff, like with Vector Man and whatnot. Like, everyone else was like, oh crap, how do we do that?
Yeah. It immediately shifted things, like you said, overnight, because all of a sudden now Nintendo was controlling the narrative and everybody else was trying to catch up to them. And you finally had sort of an edgier character while still very much Nintendo. Like, Donkey Kong was, I think, a good compromise. It was a Nintendo character that could be a little bit edgier than Mario, but still retaining that quintessential Nintendo heart. And I'm not saying Sonic doesn't have heart. Don't get mad at me.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that, but you know what I mean. It has that same Nintendo spirit, I guess.
But just from the opening with Cranky playing the gramophone on the arcade girders and then the boombox coming down and DK just like stomping on his head and beginning to beatbox.
Right.
It's like, oh shit.
Not only that, but this is the exact same show where Nintendo unveiled, or Nintendo of America that is, unveiled their Play It Loud campaign that was concocted to take the fight back to Sega after Sega had, portrayed them as out of touch and something that little children play until they graduate to the Sega Genesis. Now Nintendo had more of a contemporary identity for a couple of years where they were more part of the 90s generation, X Games, MTV, that kind of
torn
attitude.
Jeans, backwards hats,
Jinko,
spray paint.
Yeah. People make fun of the Play It Loud campaign now.
I'm still living it.
I mean, it's derided by people as being dumb, garish, very much, too much of the era. But I really feel like...
I mean, yeah, that's undeniable, but I still love it.
I feel like those criticisms come from those who weren't the exact right age to appreciate it. And
yeah.
It's funny about this era of the 90s because, we have like 80s nostalgia that's, I feel like it's been in vogue for 20 years now. And the 80s were derided for the longest time as being tacky, gaudy, materialistic, which they were. But at a certain point, like the 80s aesthetic became cool. It became like charming to people. And I feel like this era of the 90s, for whatever reason, doesn't get its shrift.
I think it's finally coming into vogue just now. There's been a rash of sort of like PSX and N64 aesthetic indie games coming in. And so, like, at least for, like, the mid to late 90s, I feel like the time has finally come.
Yeah, obviously, when you have the shift from the mid-90s to the late 90s and then the early aughts, people immediately look back on this and they're like, ugh, like, that feels so un-Nintendo. Because it was. It was very un-Nintendo. The Play It Loud campaign was designed to provide a stark contrast between the identity that Nintendo had cultivated since 1985 in the West. And then with the N64, they kind of shifted away a little bit from that and brought it back something like not all the way back, but they kind of got away from the like extreme in your face sort of mentality. But the culture itself, I mean, I think there's two ways of looking at it because the culture kind of got more extreme as the 90s went on, as we entered the age of Jerry Springer and wrestling's second boom period. And you kind of had, a little bit more in the way of just sort of brash irreverence. But then you also had like the rise of like the Backstreet Boys and NSYNC and, bubblegum pop. And you kind of had this more sleek sheen to everything. So the grunge era of the 90s is really what Play It Loud invokes more than anything.
And God, do I love some grunge.
Grunge is something I've never personally gotten into, but I kind of respect the hell out of it. So,
well, as you say, we were kind of exactly the right age for it.
Yeah.
Like that ad campaign was targeted at us and people in our sort of age range. And yeah, I can't blame people not in that range for just not vibing with it at all.
Well,
but yeah,
even as somebody who wasn't into, Nirvana or Pearl Jam during that era,
Nirvana's so fucking overrated, and I say that as a Seattle resident. Anyway,
I know, but I'm speaking to the cheap seats here. I wasn't going to start talking about Temple of the Dog or anything. Like
Okay.
As a Nintendo kid, more than just the aesthetics of the Play It Loud campaign, it was refreshing and invigorating to see Nintendo stick up for itself a little bit.
Mm.
It's like, we're not going to take it anymore. We're going to punch you in the throat, Sega. And we're going to do it.
Beatbox on your corpse.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to do it in this multifaceted campaign, but we're also going to back it up. We're going to back it up with this new game that's unlike anything that's the Genesis would even be capable of. And I speak that, and I say that with all the respect for Sega Genesis, the console I was secretly envious of for 3 years. But you mentioned all these attempts to recreate the graphics of the Donkey Kong Country games, or Killer Instinct for that matter. Mm-hmm. And the thing that always strikes me is how muted the color palettes are in every other attempt, especially on the Genesis. It just feels washed out.
You go look at Vector Man and it's just like green and brown.
Yeah. I don't think we can do justice the reporting that's already been done on the 1994 Summer CES. Because, keep in mind, this is before YouTube. This is before companies would stream their presentations at these big trade show events. This is before it was part of the language of fandom. This was for retailers. This was for the few video game journalists out there. And this is before every Tom, Dick, and Harry had a website. Okay? Like, this is still kind of old media, the world that they were operating in. And it's one of the reasons we don't discuss the Summer CES that much, because we weren't experiencing ourselves as fans. However, what we can do is we can add commentary to the reporting that's already been done. So we're going to do something a little atypical right now, Gibbon. The 2014 book Console Wars, Sega and Nintendo and the Battle That Defined a Generation by Blake J. Harris. It's all about the infamous console wars of the early 1990s. And it's a terrific book. I don't recommend video game literature outside of
the ones we're in.
Well, yeah, I was going to say outside of player's guides and ones that feature DK Vine somehow. But this is interesting, and it's one of the few on video game history that actually gives Donkey Kong Country its due, which is one of the reasons I am actually saying you should check it out. Because we talked about Donkey Kong Country being memory hold a little bit, because people don't recognize how instrumental it was in turning this tide. People might know of the Sega Nintendo console war of the early 1990s, and they vaguely know Nintendo kind of won, but they don't know how. They don't know why. And because I guess that would give Donkey Kong Country too much credit, and the narratives that had to form in the early aughts around the time of the buyout, we couldn't give Donkey Kong Country any credit. So it was just like, oh, and then yada, 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 Nintendo wins, all hail Mario. So there is an entire chapter of Console Wars that is dedicated to the unveiling of Donkey Kong Country at the Summer CES 1994. And it's specifically a transcription of the events that they held for retailers and press on June 23rd, 1994. Nintendo performed a skit to unveil Donkey Kong Country. And this is it's one of those things that if it were on YouTube and it came a decade later or 15 years later, it would be memed. There would be GIFs or GIFs of it everywhere. It would be one of those things.
Yeah.
One of those things where we constantly celebrate it in our fandom, no matter how cheesy or cringeworthy it might be.
Yeah, just like other skits Nintendo has done in the more recent past on directs and presentations and whatnot.
These little moments, these little victories we have as a fandom. Like, if you listen, you can hear it coming as a famous introduction to a Donkey Kong Country game.
Love that moment.
So this is kind of lost media, but it has been transcribed to the letter in the book Console Wars. It's a chapter called Kings of the Jungle. And as a change of pace, I thought we would read this chapter aloud. I still recommend people pick up the book. You can get it, as an ebook, or you can still readily find a physical copy. I think it's still in print. But we're going to read this chapter about Donkey Kong Country on the Kongversation. So here's the thing. There is dialogue. There are characters, real people who work for Nintendo of America that we're going to have to voice. We're going to have to bring to life.
I sure hope we cleared all the legal requirements to read this out.
Oh, it's fine. We're also going to be adding commentary, so it's not like we're just doing an audiobook presentation, all right?
Fair enough.
We're going to be adding annotations and cliff notes and what have you. So, all right, I will read all prose, all out of dialogue prose,
okay? How are we going to divvy up the dialogue, though?
We're going to figure that out as we get to each name.
Okay.
I
think there's like 4 or 5 characters in this.
Jesus. All right. Jesus isn't one of them. I just said Jesus as a anguished cry. All right.
Yeah, but he's always watching.
That's right. Especially for Donkey Kong game reveals. Big fan. Friend of the show. So
he's also the King of Kings.
Yeah. In a continued effort to reclaim the fun, and in honor of what Nintendo hoped would be a game-changing surprise, the guys in Redmond decided to do something a little different for the 1994 Summer CES. Instead of just writing a straightforward speech for Peter Main or Howard Lincoln, Don Verrieu? Terrible with names. Help me out.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. Don,
I guess is as good as mine on that one.
Don Verrieu scripted an elaborate skit to perform in front of developers, distributors, and retailers on June 23rd, 1994. And to finally usher Nintendo out of its dark ages, the performance fittingly began in complete and utter darkness.
Shall I read Bruce Donaldson here?
Bruce Donaldson. I was going to say, you be
and then
Bruce.
You can take Randy.
Yeah, and then you can take Peter Main, and then I will take, there's a guy named George Harrison.
Not that George Harrison, but a different George.
We don't know.
That's fair enough. I have no idea. So, starting with Bruce Donaldson. Randy, how much further do we have to go?
I'm Randy? Did we decide I'm Randy?
Yes.
Okay. Relax, Bruce. The map says we're almost there. A tiny halo of light appears. Not that halo. And then another. So small it's hard to determine the source. And then until Nintendo's Bruce Donaldson and Randy Peretzman, I was like Pretzelman, Peretzman, move through the audience on their way toward the stage.
You hear them say these marketing guys are pretty far out and out of touch with reality. But this is really far out. We're in the middle of no place.
Nope. No place at all. Some lights turn on, still dim, but with a bright auburn hue. And the intrepid explorers Donaldson and Peretzman are revealed to be dressed in full safari gear.
You know, I bet there's not a dry martini within 1,000 miles of this place.
Shh! There's the tent right over there. The stage becomes fully lit, revealing an elaborate campsite in the middle of nowhere. And then from the tent emerges Peter Main, a cigar dangling between his lips with just the right amount of nonchalance. So already, this is not going to be something that would fly in any other era of Nintendo.
Mm-hmm.
Glorifying smoking of all things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We decided I'm Peter?
You're Peter.
Hey, aren't you a sight for sore eyes?
I like how we're vamping it up now. All right. George Harrison steps out of the tent next. And then Nintendo's powers all shake hands.
Dr. Livingwell, I presume. Life has its ups and downs. Whoever said you couldn't make the best of a bad deal? Come here and sit down for a minute.
You know, Randy, we have almost everything we need here. And anything that we want to hear from the States, we have all this equipment.
Harrison tilts his head toward electrical thingamajigs and a large television screen.
Thingamajigs, technical term that.
Yeah.
George has been working on this for 5 or 6 months, but the only problem is that we don't have anything out of sports news. So, Bruce, tell me, the Sonics really did go all the way, didn't they?
The audience breaks out in laughter. Yeah, that's riveting material.
Man, you're completely out of touch with reality. It must be the heat out here.
Oh, the Sonics were playing poorly, and that's why it was funny. It's a contemporary joke. Okay. And also, fuck the Sonics, right? Because that's Sega.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know.
All right,
I don't even know what sport that is. Like basketball?
Basketball, yeah. Yeah, come on.
Okay.
Heat? Try running the marketing department. You get a second-degree burn these days just answering the phone.
The audience breaks out in laughter again. Genuine this time. Okay.
That's why we left. The guys in Japan were screaming. The guys in Redmond were screaming. The reps were raising hell. Man, it was time to clear out and go to ground. Was that me again?
You're just talking to yourself
so
for a
this
while.
is the solution? To run away from it all? Brucey, running away? You gotta understand. We're not running away from anything. We just decided to come out here on a little hunting trip. As a matter of fact, there's some of those little suckers again.
Maine grabs a shotgun and fires twice. And suddenly a bloodied image of Sonic the Hedgehog appears on the large TV. The crowd loves it. This is so precisely their humor. And Peter Maine picks up a nearby martini as he basks in the adoration. So we have smoking, drinking, and murder.
And cursing.
And cursing, yeah.
And that's what you're after? And that's what you're after? Flying hedgehogs? Only in a manner of speaking, my good man. That's just the small stuff. Let me put it this way. You remember it was about 10 years ago when Nintendo took its first trip out here to the video game jungle, looking for the beast that would put us back on the map. What we came up with 10 years ago was the big ape called Donkey Kong, who took us from a single coin-op machine to a company doing over $100 million in just a couple months. Well, we're on the same kind of hunt again, and we're going to find the next group of 800-pound gorillas, and I mean big, hairy, muscular games. And I gotta tell you, this expedition is right on track. It's leading us back to where we belong as the undisputed king of the jungle.
Peter Maine smiles, nods, and slides the cigar back into his mouth.
Yeah, I've heard that before. And I gotta tell you, Peter, it looks a lot of people back in the States think that Nintendo and this whole business is going right down the river. I mean, we all knew it was going to be a transition year. But nobody thought we were going to be seeing numbers like this. Well, no question it's become a real jungle. The competition's out there like a bunch of drunken head shrinkers. Oof.
Ooh.
I mean, there's a whole group out there saying every day that the current technology is tired and over. But let's not lose sight of the big picture, guys. First of all, this video game industry ain't small potatoes.
A graphic appears on the television, indicating the industry has grown to $15 billion worldwide, $6 billion in the United States.
And secondly, yeah, Nintendo had a bad year. I mean, what the heck? Sales dropped, profits dropped, and we still made $500 million in profit, which was about 5 times what the other guys made, because as he ran around the world trying to buy market share, he gave it all away and ended up barely breaking even.
It dawns on the audience almost all at once that this is more than just a silly skit. It's a satire about the war between Sega and Nintendo. Oh! It's an allegory. Oh! You're not just wasting our time.
Yeah. Finally, I gotta tell you, the future's gonna be bright. I mean, look at all those big strategic thinkers who are standing in line. AT&T, Sony, Panasonic, JVC, even that guy Spielberg over there in Hollywood. All waiting to get into this business. It can't be so bad. You guys look awfully calm for the predicament you're in.
Peter Main suavely removes the cigar from his mouth. And at that point, it must also dawn on the audience that Main should never be without a cigar. It just fits him so well. Smoking's cool.
I'm imagining a Groucho Marx sort of thing.
Yeah.
Well, Bruce, old buddy, you're right. 20 points ain't exactly chopped liver. But you gotta be patient. Be patient a little bit. First of all, this is June, and we still got over 2/3 of the business year ahead of us. And I gotta tell you, we're going to make some really big things happen over these next 6 months. So why don't you just cool your jets a little bit? I mean, sit back, relax, have a drink. We got some real reason for optimism. And to start out with, I want to have my good man George the Jungle here fill you in on a couple of discoveries he's made since we've been out here. And believe me, it's gonna help you relax.
With a spear in hand, Harrison proudly talks about an amazing discovery he made one day while wandering through the Outback. The Outback's not the jungle, but okay, that's fine.
Oh, it was the lost temple of Pac-Man. Apparently, it was a sacred cave that had accidentally covered over when the natives started building condos. But even so, I found a way inside, and there before me was the secret to the lost civilizations of video games. There before me were the carcasses of Atari and Coleco, and there stood a magic cauldron, still at a full boil. Once I looked at it, I knew exactly what it was. A native crystal ball with all the secrets of the video game industry.
And then Randy, this is Randy. We forgot about Randy, but Randy's still here. Randy, what were you smoking in there?
What the cauldron said was exactly what we've been hearing for months in our own market research. I asked the cauldron what the players want, and every few seconds, not surprisingly, the answer was good games. But then came a group of answers that probably in hindsight shouldn't have surprised us. They not only wanted great games, but also wanted to be associated with a system that makes them feel cool. They want to be associated with hardware that's advanced and up to date. In short, they wanted fun, and they wanted image. So I asked, what does all this mean for the Super NES? And the cauldron boiled for a while, and it got cloudy. It was clear there was work to be done.
That's right, and there was all the information we needed to get started in a whole new direction.
The first thing we did was set out to try and find a stronger Nintendo message, and even stronger delivery. Our TV campaigns had to be outrageous, and they had to be seen in more places than ever before. Places that even your reps might see them. And at the same time, you're going to see an explosion of Nintendo ads in the gaming magazines. We decided once and for all to break our competitors' lock on that key media.
Harrison then goes on to talk about everything that the new post-denial Nintendo has in store for the months ahead. Bigger events, better communication, and a recommitment to the fun that made Nintendo a household name.
I know this is a real change of attitude, but we can't afford to miss out anymore.
And just like that, Nintendo awakens and finds a balance between the tortoise and the hare, slow and deliberate, friendly and flashy.
Finally, we decided to get some street smarts on the whole violence issue. Is there a market out there for more sophisticated games? Of course. So we'll accept the ability of a rating system to allow the consumers to make informed choices. From now on, we'll see no repeats of the Mortal Kombat incident, where we saw customers buy what they thought was a more attractive product from our competitor. Those days are behind us. We've modified the internal guidelines, and I can tell you now that Mortal Kombat 2 will be the same whether it's on our platform or anyone else's.
And cunning. Always cunning. With the newly created ratings board, Nintendo now had a built-in bunker in which it could duck for cover.
Hey, isn't that all right? I mean, thanks, George. All that good stuff. Now that's quite a start.
Thunderous applause takes hold of the room. To his left and to his right, everyone applauded except for him. Al Nilsson was impressed by the performance, which exuded an almost Sonic-worthy level of cleverness. But he knew all too well that words were only that. Had Nintendo really learned from its mistakes? Had they finally awoken? Would they really be able to merge that long-term, stay-the-course attitude with the short-term shrifts of this post-Sega world? Nilsson was skeptical, but less so about 10 minutes later when Don Coiner, Nintendo's director of advertising, appeared on stage to discuss the company's new marketing campaign. "Look what I found thrashing around the swamp," George Harrison said, introducing the cameo. "It's Don Coiner, and he said he had a revelation out there."
"Don, I didn't know you were out here," Donaldson added. "What are you doing in the middle of the jungle?"
"Do you want me to be Don?"
Sure.
"Well," Coiner began, with a long overdue twinkle in his eye, "I got so tired of all those retailers and sales reps complaining about Nintendo's advertising that I decided to come out here and fix it for myself." Finally, Coiner thought, as he finally had the opportunity to speak these words. Finally, finally, finally. After spending a large, stressful portion of the past few years trying to convince Arakawa, Lincoln, and Maine to let Nintendo take off the gloves, tastefully, of course, they were finally willing to do something different. There were a variety of reasons that Nintendo was now willing to spruce things up, but the straw that broke the camel's back turned out literally to be a camel. In late 1993, Coiner initiated a series of research studies in which gamers were given a stack of 20 pictures depicting animals, and then asked to use these images to answer a series of questions about video games. Questions like, which animals best represent Nintendo, and which ones best represent Sega? The results were nearly unanimous. Cheetahs, gazelles, and other speedy creatures were associated with Sega, whereas elephants, camels, and other slow movers supposedly embodied Nintendo. Arakawa was normally distrustful of focus groups and marketing data, but something about the images made a dent this time, and that enabled Coiner to move forward with what he was now about to unveil. "Kids want more excitement from our advertising, but the answer was not to imitate the competition. We have to do them one better," he said. And with that, he introduced Nintendo's Play It Loud campaign. On the surface, yay! Woo! I know that guy!
Woo! Yeah!
On the surface, Play It Loud appeared to be exactly what Coiner had claimed it would not, a Sega ripoff. With quicker cuts, louder music, and an aggressive feeling, it had much in common with its competitors' spots. But upon closer examination, that wasn't quite the case. The colors were still bright, the game footage was still plentiful, and although there was mischief, there was also a sense of optimism. "We're going to give the kids an anthem," Coiner proudly explained. "One that says, you can't be young forever, so live it large, live it free, and play it loud." Good, but not great, Nilsson thought. But even with his high standards, he couldn't help but echo Coiner's sentiment. Finally, Nintendo should have done this, or something like it, several years ago. But better late than never, right?
Anyway,
Peter Main said, stepping in.
When Arakawa and Lincoln sent us out to the jungle, they said they weren't going to take no for an answer. They wanted to know if we could put behind us this lily-white image on game content. Well, I think we've just shown that the answer to that is yes.
Tattered applause swept through the room, but still nothing from Nilsson. Man, fuck this guy. That guy was a tough one to please.
Then, of course, there are the games.
Main continued.
It's no secret we were weak on this in the second half of last year, and yes, Griffey and Metroid have started to turn the tide, but they're not enough. We thought we'd found a great combination of old and new, but when we unloaded the cages back in Redmond, the response was, "Gee, that's terrific, but it ain't enough, and don't you come back home until you get one more drop-dead-in-your-tracks killer attraction." They reminded me that 10 years ago they shook the entire country with the big feat of Donkey Kong. Can't you guys go out there and find us one more huge hit that will once more make Nintendo undisputed king of the jungle? And so that's exactly what we did. Oh man, they keep bringing up Donkey Kong for some reason.
They keep bringing up his feet. Oh man.
A trend that will last.
The future Platonic staffers in attendance.
It all started here.
Yeah. Incepted the idea in their brains. Maine took a couple of steps closer to the audience, finding his rhythm, and then appearing to near a crescendo to this whole performance.
Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to the eighth wonder of the video game world. The best game ever created by Nintendo or anyone else. The new, stunning industry breakthrough, Donkey Kong Country.
With these words, Peter Main introduced a clip of the atomic bomb Nintendo needed to turn the tide in its war with Sega. A game that never would have existed had Tony Harmon not willed it into existence on the basis of the scenario he presented to Yamauchi of One Less Bad Commercial. This was it, the true game changer that both returned Nintendo to their roots and also took them one step ahead. Nintendo was back, and as everyone in the room went wild with applause, this time Nilsson was the loudest of them all. I guess I'll be, Nilsson?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, bravo! Kmart's senior buyer said 2 days later as he approached Peter Main at Nintendo's booth. Although he was a famously difficult man to please, on this day his face was filled with nothing but pleasantries.
Well, hello there, old friend,
Main said with an easygoing grin.
I'll take a bravo whenever I can get one, but to what do I owe the honor?
Where do I even begin? The buyer from Kmart replied, forcing a chuckle. But really, that game you all showed off at the presentation, it's out of this world.
It's something else, isn't it?
That's gonna put you guys back on top.
Whoa now.
Main cautioned.
One thing at a time.
No, I mean it, the buyer declared. And in the spirit of putting my money where my mouth is, Kmart is ready to make a very serious commitment. Before Main even realized what was happening, several Kmart employees emerged from the trade show's hubbub and stepped forward with a large check mounted on a plywood frame. The check was made out to Nintendo America for $32 million. We'd like to officially place an order for 1 million units, Kmart's senior buyer announced. What do you say?
$32 at retail cost.
For a moment, Main was speechless. Not only was the gesture wonderfully surprising, but selling a quantity like this right off the bat would make Donkey Kong Country one of the best-selling games of 1994. It would also give them enormous momentum going into the Christmas season. The game would be released in November, and almost single-handedly propel Nintendo back past Sega.
I think you know exactly what I'm going to say,
Main said, that grin still sliding across his face.
This is a terrific gesture, and I'm truly honored. But there ain't no way we can allocate that much product to you guys. Let me crunch the numbers with my guys back in Redmond, and I'll get back to you with what Kmart's allocation will be. How does that sound?
How did it sound? Well, it sounded like although the video game industry had dramatically changed these past few years, Nintendo was still the same. Dedicated to great quality and even greater quality control.
I just looked it up. $32 in 1994 is about $70 today.
Whew. So that's the story of Donkey Kong Country's Unveiling. And
I wish a YouTube clip existed of this.
It's why I wanted to read it, because not only does it provide some much needed comedy, but it also gives context to this era. It's not enough to just say Donkey Kong Country came out and was a big deal that holiday season. It shows exactly what role it played in turning the tide as the chapter actually said, for Nintendo against Sega.
It's kind of wild how it basically, like, this is what Conker did at the end of the N64 lifespan. It came out with, like, the smoking, the drinking, the cursing, the crude humor, the shooting the competitors, but it was Donkey Kong. Rare just does this, apparently.
Yeah, Rare, but like almost bookended their tenure with Nintendo with smoking, drinking,
with the
and
same
murder.
ad campaign. Yeah. That's kind of wild.
It really can't be overstated. You can see, like, Kmart. I mean, I know it's Kmart. Like, what the fuck? But Kmart at that
was
time,
a big deal back at the time.
At that time, Kmart was one of the biggest video game retailers, and to have that buy-in from the get-go, and that's another thing. People, when they first saw Donkey Kong Country being broadcast on the screens, they thought it was for the Nintendo Ultra 64. And then they had to explain to them, this is for the Super Nintendo. It's coming out this year.
Yeah.
Melted their faces off is what it did.
For real. Like, again, I can't state how much Nintendo was pushing graphical envelopes at the time.
Yeah.
So, like, Star Fox had come out the year before and had done, like, actual, like, 3D graphics on the Super Nintendo. And it had looked like it was very, very cool. Don't get me wrong. Love that game. Played it all the time with my boyfriend. But it's very rough. It's polygons. It's very low poly 3D models. And it is, like, while impressive from, like, a technical standpoint, it's not super impressive to look at. But Donkey Kong Country was different.
Yeah, so I remember when I first saw the commercial for Star Fox, and I was like, whoa, this looks different. This is amazing.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
The thing about Star Fox is Star Fox and Donkey Kong Country is such a huge leap from Star Fox to Donkey Kong Country.
And that's literally 1 year apart.
Yeah.
So, like...
But also what's important and why I was stressing the play it loud stuff, Star Fox was kind of burdened by Nintendo sticking to their old ad campaign, their old way of marketing.
Yeah.
Donkey Kong Country had a whole different presentation behind it. Not just this presentation with the some of the unfortunate humor and the martinis and the cigars, and the shotgun, but the actual marketing campaign, Play It Loud. And of course, several Rare employees were at hand during this Summer CES to show it off. Steve Mails has shared quite a bit from the show on social media, including his badge. It's interesting because his badge, his credentials are listed as Rare Coin-It Toys out of Miami, Florida. Which, of course, Rare had the subsidiary in Miami at the time, but it was still listed as Rare Coin-It.
That's amazing. I also love the little faux banana labels, but they're Donkey Kong. I want a sheet of those.
Yeah, Nintendo was giving out stickers at the show, and one of the stickers they were giving out was a parody of the Chiquita logo, I think.
Either Chiquita or Dole. One of the two.
One of the two, and which is funny because eventually they actually did do a marketing campaign for returns with bananas. But yeah, this is a parody of the logo, and it's Donkey Kong's face, and it just says Donkey Kong underneath, yellow and blue. They're really, really cool. There's also pins that were given out for the show. One of Donkey Kong hugging the Nintendo logo, which is... I really want one of these pins.
I really want one too. Oh my god.
This is the same Donkey Kong render that's on my shirt replica right now.
I wonder if Banana Meteor owns one of those. They collect pins.
I wasn't really interested in pins until my very first E3 that I attended in person, because that's where you got the new Rare logo pin. And I was just like, oh, wow, this is so cool. And then every E3, they would have new pins for, like, Sea of Thieves and Battletoads. And then fan gamers started coming out with the pins. And I was just, before I knew it, I had, like, a shelf worth of pins. And this is really, really, this would be like one of the jewels of my collection. But you also had the Rareware logo, because this is the unveiling of the Rareware logo for the very first time as well.
Was it? Damn.
Yeah. And of course, I have a Fangamer version of the Rareware logo, but this vintage one would be pretty sweet to own as well. But the big centerpiece of Nintendo's floor display at the Summer CES was this enormous, like, mountainous cliffside that's decked out in plants, and it looks really cool. It has monitors on the sides displaying Donkey Kong Country, and the Donkey Kong Country logo is the like early logo that before it was finalized. Like the country's the same, but the Donkey Kong logo is still the yellow from Donkey Kong 94, adjusted a little bit. But on the top of this, you have the animatronic scale replica of Donkey Kong's treehouse that every so often the light inside would come on. You would see the silhouette of Donkey Kong, and the treehouse would start violently shaking back and forth, looking like Donkey Kong is in the middle of either coitus or some self-care, if you know what I mean.
One of our Twitter responses was, if the house is a tremblin, it might be a Kremlin.
Yeah, I enjoyed that, actually. Of course, this has been captured in some of the surviving footage of the 94 Summer CES that you can find on YouTube, of which I watched pretty much all available footage of before we did this episode. But long ago, I think it was Cameron actually captured the footage of this, and I've since uploaded it on our Tenor account. So if you pull up Donkey Kong Treehouse on Discord or social media, you will find our GIF or GIF of this, of Donkey Kong having a good time, let's just say. But it's one of the most remarkable set pieces I've ever seen designed for any trade show that Nintendo's ever done. Like, I only wish they had something like this at the times I attended E3. Like, they had some fabulous set pieces at E3, but nothing for Donkey Kong, of course. So, one thing that's not remembered, because it's not as immediately memorable, as infamous as the Rocking Treehouse, they had two Neckies flying just to, I believe, the left of it.
Nobody ever talks about that.
Yeah. They had two Neckies, like, kind of like a ceiling fan almost, going in circles around a palm tree. And they put so much effort into this display, especially for 1994. Especially before the game was even out. Like, they were like, yeah, we're gonna put Neckies. We're gonna create Neckies. And I wonder where they are. I wonder whatever happened to these Neckies. I mean, I'm hoping they're in somebody's collection somewhere. I'm hoping they're not in a landfill somewhere. This was also, beyond just the violently rocking treehouse and the Neckies, you also had Charles Martinet on hand. Now, of course, this was still 2 years before Charles Martinet would really cement his role as Mario. He voiced Mario in stuff prior to Mario 64, but Mario 64 really solidified him as the voice of Mario. But Charles Martinet was on hand as Donkey Kong, using SimGraphics VA actor technology. It would become known as Mario in real time. It's technology that Nintendo still employs today at events where they have Mario, Luigi, I believe Wario is one of them, talking to attendees at events. And Charles Martinet would be behind the screen, actually embodying Donkey Kong, and Donkey Kong's head would be floating around talking to attendees. And usually this meant Donkey Kong vaguely sexually harassing, hitting on women in what was viewed as a charming mid-90s way, but really just kind of stepping over the line a little bit. But yeah, if you want to hear Charles Martinet voicing Donkey Kong, I believe it played out our theme song on this episode, so you can hear a little bit of that, which Cameron and I talked about it on the episode last year when Charles Martinet retired. We talked about his time as Donkey Kong, but you can also view it on some of these preserved video displays on YouTube from this show. But yeah, this is also the model of Donkey Kong's head that appeared in the Japanese Super Donkey Kong 2 commercial a year later. Do you remember when Donkey Kong's head got shot out of the cannons in that commercial?
I don't, but I believe you.
Yeah,
that
so
sounds like something they do.
That model is exactly this model, right down to his pursed lips.
Huh, okay then.
Yeah. So there was also, and this is on our key art for this episode, there was a smaller treehouse built just to the side of Nintendo's display that had another recreation of Donkey Kong hugging the Nintendo logo. But this was more of a statue, a rudimentary statue.
They can't really decide on how many toes he has across different depictions.
This was still when Donkey Kong had 4 fingers. This is before they bumped him up to 5 fingers. But if you look closely on the in-game model, he still has 4 fingers. And eventually
Diddy had nostrils.
Yeah. Later on, before release, the later renders would bump him up to the digits he still has today, but they were going full on Western animation Simpsons with and I think it must have, probably Nintendo is like, can you give Donkey Kong more fingers? But they didn't say so for Diddy. They didn't raise any issue with Diddy until 2003. So anyway, the smaller version of the treehouse would later reappear at the Winter CES in early 1995, where Donkey Kong had this big victory lap after the huge success of Donkey Kong Country, and they actually added a statue of Diddy to the treehouse as well. So you'll occasionally see pictures of this treehouse with the Diddy statue, and people will say it's from the Summer CES, but no, it's actually from the Winter CES half a year later. So don't believe everything you read, folks. So because this was held in late June, because June 23rd to June 25th, this is much later than E3 would traditionally be held. Yeah. And of course, E3 for a while there was being held in May. So this meant Nintendo Power didn't discuss the CES, and therefore didn't discuss Donkey Kong Country, aside from 2 minor occurrences, until their August issue number 63, where they finally had an article on the Summer CES, as well as an entry for Donkey Kong Country in their Pack Watch section. But in the July issue, just very under the radar, they ran their very first Play It Loud ad. They had this 2-page ad in Nintendo Power, and presumably they ran it in other video game magazines, according to the big
I see they hadn't finalized the font for the ad campaign yet.
Yeah, there was no finalized font. They just sneaked Donkey Kong Country screenshots in the mix, along with games that were currently available, and it was just this very garish, ugly looking ad, but it was the introduction of Play It Loud. Not legible at all. They used snaking font that you would have to reorient the page to read, and it was dumb. I will admit this was a dumb ad, but it was kind of the soft launch of Play It Loud before it really got into gear. So they were working out the kinks a little bit, you know?
This is very ad design is my passion sort of.
Yeah, when people say Play It Loud was ugly, I hope this is what they're referring to and not the rest of the campaign. But
yeah,
they also listed Donkey Kong Country in the upcoming games list, but no other info on it until August, which is where they really went all out and they started building the hype for Donkey Kong Country. So I would like to read once again. We're going to be reading again. I'm sorry, I didn't even ask you to bring your reading glasses, Jam. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I'm always wearing my glasses.
Oh, okay, okay. I have reading glasses, but I usually wear contacts because, I'm vain.
I can't wear contacts. Can't open my eye enough.
Oh, I'm sorry. You can't like fold the contact and blink.
Um, eh, it's fine. I'm used to the glasses.
All right. Well, I'm finally getting new contacts this week. So
Congratulations.
eye insurance finally kicked in. So
Fuck yeah.
this page is the introductory page for their article on the Summer CES. Can I just say, because I was thumbing through all the Nintendo powers from this summer, June, July, and August, and it's amazing how much of a generational leap kicks in starting with the August issue. Because it feels like reading the June issue Nintendo Power, you're in another era entirely, like you're 10 years in the past. That's what it feels like. Going from mid 94 to Donkey Kong Country onward, it really does feel like it's not just this huge game comes out. It just feels like you are finally entering the modern era of Nintendo.
Big paradigm shift across those two issues.
There's so many like licensed games in there from movies and weird just cash-ins and, I mean, no shade meant towards any of that, but it really was just like, here's this licensed, like cartoon game, and we're going to run like 8 pages on that. And then, eventually it's like Nintendo's own identity really wasn't asserting itself. And then Nintendo Power really became, here's Nintendo's games. Fuck yeah. And we're gonna like focus less on this licensed crap. And anyway. So the CES article, it says, we interrupt your normal reading to bring you this special report. And then it says, the beast is back. Donkey Kong Country. And there's a little inserted picture of that smaller treehouse with Donkey Kong on top of it. And I'll read this.
Okay.
The jungle, early morning. Dew steams off the dense leaves. A monkey chitters nervously in the high canopy. A lion growls. There's no lions in Donkey Kong Country, but all right. Parrots burst from a tree and shoot away in fear. You hear distant thunder and feel the earth shudder. Something is coming. Something huge. Something almost beyond belief. Nothing can stand in its way. Giant trees crash down, and native drums pound a warning faster, 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 and suddenly he's there, like some legend come to life. Donkey Kong, in the ultimate 16-bit game of all time. Welcome to Donkey Kong Country. The world caught its first glimpse of this mythic beast at Summer CES, Consumer Electronics Show, in Chicago. They were stunned. They were awed. Many thought the game concealed some new technology, a chip or processor in the game pack. But the technology was all in the programming, and the credit went to Rare Limited and Nintendo, who brought the beast back to life. How big is Donkey Kong Country? Too big for Sega. They didn't dare show themselves at all. Now that's not actually true. So in doing research, Sega did have a presence. They had a limited presence because Nintendo actually had it in their contract, in their exhibitor contract, and Sega had to keep a far distance from their own booth. So there was a little bit of chicanery afoot on Nintendo's part. And then Sega was there. They just didn't have as much real estate because Nintendo kind of elbowed them out. And 3DO and Jaguar cowered in the shadowy corners. Enough said for now. Now, this is what's also interesting because I didn't really find this in a lot of contemporary reporting, but Killer Instinct was also at the Summer CES.
That's wild. I never think of those two things being like the same day. You know what I mean?
Well, and I believe I've seen pictures of Robin Beanland there, and I was like, it's funny Robin Beanland would be there just for the one song he did for Donkey Kong Country. But no, Killer Instinct was also at the Summer CES, and there's a little paragraph about both Killer Instinct and Cruisin' USA, if you would like to read that.
Sure. The first Nintendo Ultra 64 software dazzled a select group of designers, licensees. Oh, fuck, it's on a red background.
Do you want? Oh, I'm sorry, you're colorblind. Let me read it.
Yep, nope, I can do this.
Okay.
Select group of game designers, licensees, and reporters in a secret CES suite. Killer Instinct is a game of futuristic combat with stunning 64-bit graphics, 12 main characters, and some killer surprises. This killer game hits the arcades this fall and should debut with the home Project Reality system in the fall of '95. Check out the preview coming next month. As for Cruisin' USA from Williams, it's the fastest, most realistic arcade racer you'll ever see. In the arcades, you'll climb behind the wheel of the race car of your choice and put the pedal down for 3,000 scorching miles. At home next year, you'll have the exact same graphics as in the arcade, but no $10,000 arcade car to climb in. Life's rough.
So they're lying to you a little bit here, or they're being purposely misleading, I should say, because of course Killer Instinct and Cruisin' USA were not actually running. Like they were billed as running on Nintendo Ultra 64 hardware that was just in an arcade cabinet, not actually accurate.
Not strictly true, but
no, but it was part of the early marketing in the West for what became the N64. And like I always forget the Killer Instinct. I always associate Killer Instinct with 1995 because that's when the Super Nintendo version of it came out. And so I just forget about the arcade release, which was, the same time as Donkey Kong Country.
That's wild.
Yeah. What I didn't realize, what I was learning for the first time, compiling all of my notes for this episode, and this is what I'm going to read. And I'm sorry I made you read the one with the red background. I Virtual Boy'd you.
It's fine.
Okay.
I managed it.
All right. And this finally, the last part of this page, it says, play it loud. Nintendo's domination of the Summer CES went beyond the debuts noted above. Super Punch-Out is destined to be a classic. The Illusion of Gaia is the best adventure game of the year. The innovative Uniracers utilizes the same SGI developmental processes as Donkey Kong Country.
Rest in peace, Uniracers.
Tin Star is twisted fun for the Super Scope crowd. And Donkey Kong Land for Game Boy uses the same animation as Country. Nintendo also unveiled a new style and image with the Play It Loud campaign. I did not know that Donkey Kong Land was being talked about this early.
Yeah, that's very surprising, honestly.
I don't know. I can't find any info. I guess it was just showed behind closed doors, but they were talking about it openly here.
Yeah, that's just it. Like it's a bit of a footnote at the bottom of the page, but yeah.
But yeah, in one page we have Donkey Kong Country. One page in the context of being unveiled for Nintendo Power Subscribers.
Yeah. This has all been one print page with like skewed text and dynamic images, but yeah.
Yeah, you had Donkey Kong Country, Killer Instinct, basically revealing the first games that were supposed to be for what became the Nintendo Ultra 64, which became the N64, and Donkey Kong Land, and the unveiling of the Play It Loud campaign to Nintendo's target audience. That's bewildering to me. Like, they laid out the next 2 to 3 years all in this one single page.
I'd never really, like, I knew DKC was part of the Play It Loud campaign, but I didn't realize that it basically, like, debuted the Play It Loud campaign.
Like, the Play It Loud campaign was devised in part to bolster Donkey Kong Country, and that's why when the Donkey Kong Country trilogy and the Donkey Kong Land trilogy came to the eShop in 2014, they revived Play It Loud for that one trailer.
I loved that. That was great.
it was like legitimately one of the best things. Like I have like probably my top 5 trailers, like trailer reveals. 2 of them will be from Smash Ultimate, K. Rool and Banjo and Kazooie, and one of them is that eShop trailer for the Country and Land releases. Fantastic
Good
stuff. There was also a article given to Donkey Kong Country in Packwatch, as I mentioned. So I want to read this really quick to finish setting the scene, and then we will start wrapping it up. But yeah, this is from Packwatch in that very same issue. Actually, it's before the CES coverage, weirdly enough.
Really?
But yeah, this is...
Oh, yeah, just a couple pages prior.
Just a couple pages, but Donkey Kong Country. You may recognize the name, but the game will astound you, just as it did when us and everyone else who has seen, heard, and played it. Nintendo's Donkey Kong Country for the Super NES launches a new era of super programming that will feature games far in advance of anything you've ever seen on any video game system. And it accomplishes all this on your Super NES. Sure, it sounds like so much hype. That is until you check it out for yourself. Out of more than 1,000 games this Packwatcher, don't call yourself a Packwatcher, this Packwatcher has seen over the years, this 800-pound, 32-megabit ape outpowers them all. Some people were talking about the decline of 16-bit game systems, but DK Country corked that pretty fast. The 3D graphics and animation in this Super Mario World-sized action game are so good that it puts to shame the other high-end video game systems. Naturally, inquiring minds have been asking your Pac Professor, don't call yourself that. How is all this possible? Well, it isn't simple. The brain trust at Rare in the UK worked with Nintendo to create what is undoubtedly one of the most sophisticated development studios in the world. Utilizing millions of dollars worth of silicone graphics workstations, the programmers were able to create staggeringly realistic 3D animations. Once you've created the computer animations, it's a much smaller step, like that moonwalk thing, to adapt them for use in the Super NES. Next month, we'll take a look at the making of Donkey Kong Country. Okay, you're thinking, so it looks like $1 billion, but what about the play? It looks like $1 billion? Like it looks like $1 billion dollars, I guess? Okay. Yeah. This mid-90s lingo is flying over my head. But what about the play? The play's the thing, right? Here it is in a barrel. You've got DK and Diddy, his chimpish pal. It's weird that people didn't know who Diddy was.
Yeah, right.
Like, lopping, running, rolling, swinging, swimming, climbing, jumping, riding, stomping, scratching, high-fiving, barrel blasting, and grinning like apes as they ride the rails towards imminent disaster. Let's set the scene. You've got snow, you've got jungle, you've got coral reefs, deep caverns, more jungle, cliffs, tunnels, sunsets, night, day, and more bananas than Chiquita. You'll also run into a mob of wild creatures, but some of them are your pals, like a rhino and an ostrich. So what's the bottom line from Packwatch? DK rules the jungle. Believe it. And yeah, from there, really wasn't the same. Like Nintendo of America and all of Nintendo's Western marketing went through this gradual but rapid shift as they headed towards November of 1994. And Donkey Kong Country's release. And from there, they never really looked back. It really was, like, the Play It Loud campaign got them over the console war hump and really did deliver us to what became the present day of Nintendo. And I don't think there's ever been that radical of a leap since.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you're pretty much right. Like, that was their most pretty outrageous leap in paradigm. They kind of, I don't know if dialed it back is quite the right term. They kind of gradually brought it a little bit back, brought it down a little bit as we got into the 2000s and the N64 and the GameCube. But they still sort of had that edgier tone to them than they'd had in the 80s and early 90s.
Yeah.
So never really went back on that.
All right, well, we have a call to play. By the way, hello to Freezer, who joined us on the live stream. Freezer says, I wish Donkey Kong would sexually harass me. I mean, that's the dream. And really, it would be fair play given how much we've lauded his ass over the last 30 years. I mean, in jest or not, like we owe him 1 or 2 or 3 or several thousand. So, yeah. So let's go ahead and play our call, and then we'll wrap this up for now because we're going to be talking about Donkey Kong Country quite a bit more throughout the rest of the season of the conversation. But
okay.
Yeah, I imagine our listeners will be pacing themselves with the calls. So this is the first. This is again the opening salvo of what's to come.
Let's see what it is.
Hello, Kongversation. Hello again. Okay, so this episode seems to be about the pre-release leading up to Donkey Kong Country's release and the ensuing Donkey Kong Country Mania that swept the nation. But the funny thing about that is I did have an interesting quandary about that time in Nintendo's history, right? Like there was that period in the mid-90s, right up to before when the N64 released, I think, when Donkey Kong just ruled the world. He was everywhere. They plastered him on all Nintendo merch, and he was on the Nintendo website, and there was like a bundle of like 15 Mario games, but Donkey Kong Country got top billing. It was crazy. It really was Donkey Kong Country Mania. But that got me thinking, right? Like, when you compare it to something else like Pokemania in the mid-90s, when Pokemon ruled the goddamn world and it was everywhere. I remember as a kid, I obviously wasn't there for it, I wasn't born, but I still knew about it. I had a historical context because older gamers would talk about it. They talk about Mew hiding under the truck like they were veterans trading war stories. I'd see videos about it on YouTube. I knew Pokemania was a big, big deal, even though I was never there for it myself. And when it comes to something like Donkey Kong Country Mania, I didn't know that until much later in life because I feel like it's not talked about a lot. And that's something I know a lot of other kids from my generation, Nintendo fans from my generation, can agree with. Like, we know Donkey Kong. It's not like Donkey Kong himself is forgotten, and even Diddy and Dixie and Cranky. But do you feel like that time when Donkey Kong Country ruled the world, for however brief it may have been, do you feel like that's an era that was forgotten, sort of? I know you remember it, and a lot of other people do, but just in the public consciousness, it's not very remembered like the Mario Mania of the 80s, or the Pokemania of the late 90s, or even like the Wii Sports Mania of like the mid-2000s, right? Like Donkey Kong Country Mania. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I wanted to ask when it comes to this topic. I'm interested to see what you guys have to say about this, if anything. Maybe it's a stupid question, and you won't have anything to say. We'll see. All right, catch you guys later.
Well, thank you for the call. And no, it's not a stupid question. Don't talk yourself down like that. Come on now. You did make me feel old as dirt, but I'm getting used to that. It's fine. It's fine. It happens. You know what? Contrary to what the Play It Loud campaign represented, where you're only young for a short amount of time, so enjoy it. I have stayed eternally youthful, thanks in part to the ethos of the Play It Loud campaign and Donkey Kong Country. It is
same. I'm even putting myself through second puberty.
Well, yes, you are. I'm just I just look 15 years younger than I actually am. So
no, true that. I'm jealous.
Oh, well, it does come with downsides, like getting like carded, and then people look at your ID and they look very suspicious, like you have a fake ID. It's like, really?
Yeah, people look suspiciously at my ID for different reasons.
Fair. Okay, you're never. I'm never gonna outdo you with this. So why don't we? You win. I tap out.
But no, that was a good question. I don't know if it's forgotten necessarily, but like we were saying near the beginning of the episode, I don't think we can properly convey how much of a big fucking deal it was if you weren't there for it.
Yeah.
Like, it was just, like, it was big. It was big, and it changed everything. Like,
so I think there are a couple things at play here, and they're reasons that listeners of the conversation will know quite well. I do think the buyout really did kind of hurt the long-term myth-making and long-term narratives.
Oh God, yeah, there was a lot of retroactive history going on.
And it was very immediate, the retroactive history, because I really think also the Rare buyout kind of happened at the absolute worst time. As far as cementing the history that we just put behind us.
Like, because online reporting was just getting started and stuff, and so, like, that was a big ticket item for everywhere to talk about, and it just cemented the narrative. And now if you look online for, like, archives and stuff, you're not going to find magazine articles with people talking about how good Rare's stuff was. You're going to find all of these news sites' early articles about how Rare had been shit all the time, actually, and yada, yada, yada.
And did kind of downplay the success that Donkey Kong Country not only had unto itself, but brought to Nintendo. And that Donkey Kong Country Mania, I mean, you're absolutely right. Like, Donkey Kong was everywhere for about 2 years. And I mean, even after that, like, Donkey Kong Country Mania kind of ended when the N64 came out, but it was still being felt, the resonance of it was still being felt throughout the N64 years. It wasn't until we got to the buyout, really, that it got memory hold. And Donkey Kong, through, like, 2 generations of gamers, I'm using generation as far as, like, console generations here, they viewed Donkey Kong more as a Mario character or a Mario appendage. Like, it really wasn't viewed as its own thing because most people's introduction to Donkey Kong was via a supporting character in Mario Kart or Mario Party. And then if you do a little bit of digging, you're not going to understand the historical importance that Donkey Kong Country did because you're going to have all these articles online at best saying how overrated it was, and at worst just not even talking about it, just acting like it never had the seismic impact it had. They're going to talk about Yoshi's Island from that era, which great game. They're going to talk about Super Metroid from that era, which again, great game, but they're going to just kind of downplay that Donkey Kong Country was it. It was what the Nintendo solar system revolved around for 2 years. It got to the point where I remember saying, I don't think Mario's Nintendo's mascot anymore. This was a little observation I made as a kid where I said it was like late 95. And I was just like, I think Donkey Kong is Nintendo's mascot now because he is who you saw everywhere.
Yeah. And Nintendo goes through those cycles. Like on the NES, it was Super Mario, and on the Super Nintendo, it was Donkey Kong Country for this era. And then when you got into like the N64, I'd almost argue that it was like either Banjo or The Legend of Zelda. And then GameCube was definitely Metroid's time to shine.
Well, you're forgetting Pokemon here.
Oh, yeah, Pokemon. Well, Pokemon's just been kind of this ever-present thing. The Nintendo 64 era was definitely Pokemon.
Yeah.
Yeah, Pokemon, definitely. And then GameCube was the Metroid Prime trilogy. And then for, like, the Wii, they kind of went in all on like, the Wii Sports and Wii Fit stuff. And I'd say for, like, the current generation, we're probably swinging back towards Zelda with, like, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom being the big ticket thing.
Although I would say that Mario's never really gone away since 96.
Mario's never really gone away, but Nintendo has a tendency to have like the big trilogy on any given console generation.
Yeah, but I would say that this was a weird period of time where Mario sort of retreated into the background.
Yeah.
And you had Yoshi's Island, but he was just a baby in that.
Yeah.
You had Mario
Yoshi's
RPG.
Island brings... Yeah.
Mario RPG was more of a niche kind of thing, though. I know it has a large legacy, but at the time, I don't think it really set the world on fire because it was confusing to people who were picking up a Mario game and they're like, wait, what? I can't just jump on the Goomba? Why is it taking me to the second screen? What's happening? Ah!
Yeah, a lot of people's first RPG and just like the new isometric camera angle and the isometric the CG graphics and just all these very new concepts while also expanding Mario's world and him not really being the main character of the story even. He's the character you control. He's the viewpoint character. But like Malo and Gino are much more the main characters of the story.
Like, Mario never went away even during Donkey Kong Country Mania, but it just, it really did feel like it was just kind of this ancillary thing, and it was almost like Mario represented that older version of Nintendo, that play it loud, gentle, safe Nintendo, while Donkey Kong Country, he was the man of the 90s. Yeah.
And it wasn't until the reveal of Super Mario 64, which, like Donkey Kong Country had a few years prior, just kind of fucking blew everybody's mind. Because we'd had some 3D platformers before. Some early ones before 3D platforming was really defined. And then, like, there's several articles and interviews with other developers who were showing off 3D platformers at the trade show where Super Mario 64 was unveiled. And all of them thought they had the winning formula and that theirs was better than the ones that had come prior, and they were going to be like the big one at that show. And all of them without fail went and played Super Mario 64 and came back to their own booths and were like, fuck.
I mean, Rare itself, as much as I laud Rare and hold up Banjo-Kazooie on a pedestal above Super Mario 64, we would not have Banjo-Kazooie as we know it without Super Mario 64 showing Greg Mayles and Chris Sutherland and crew, oh, this is what we need to be doing, shit.
Yeah, Super Mario 64 showed everyone that this is how you do a 3D platformer.
Yeah. You know, it's frustrating to me as somebody who lived this and really was at that sweet spot of childhood where I was old enough to be more of a fully realized person and I had a little bit more agency. So, like, it felt like Donkey Kong Country was my thing. Like, this is what I picked for myself. This isn't just a hand-me-down. This isn't something that I was too young for when it blew up originally, and I'm just coming into, like, late in the day. Like, this is my time. This is my era. This is my game. This is my franchise. And, I mean, it was incredibly frustrating to me after the buyout, during the dark era when it felt like the whole of the internet, the video game internet, was really talking smack about Donkey Kong Country, about Rare. And the thing is, I look back at it now and I'm just like, I reacted poorly to that. What I should have done is try to set an example with DK Vine and, you know, oh, I'm upset that all these big outlets are against Donkey Kong Country. That's fine. I will just use my own outlet to rally those who see through the bullshit. But I didn't do it. I just gnashed my teeth that IGN and Game Informer and the likes, you know, I was like, who cares what they think? I'm going to be my own voice. And eventually, you know, got there. I mean, we're a small voice, but we're still probably the most prominent voice for Donkey Kong fans online.
Big enough to get mentioned in official Nintendo publications.
Boom. Yeah, we did that. So that's why I'm glad I'm still doing DK Vine almost 25 years later. I'm glad that we can, you know, help reach people and say, yeah, no, this is what it was actually like. Don't believe those early aughts edgelords who say that Donkey Kong Country was never loved and people were just kind of mesmerized by its graphics and they didn't see how poor the game played. No, it played great and people loved it. It's got flaws, sure. It's not perfect. Donkey Kong Country 2 is perfect, but Donkey Kong Country was this game changer a game-changing game that changed everything. So that being said, I don't get too morose about it because I remember Donkey Kong Country Mania. I keep the spirit, the spark of it within me at all times. And I look at where we're at today. And while we're not in a level of Donkey Kong Country Mania that's comparable to 94 to 96, I think this is kind of the best time I've ever felt as a Donkey Kong fan since that time. It feels like Donkey Kong is more in the zeitgeist now. It feels like kids are more into Donkey Kong now than they have been since that time 30 years ago.
Yeah, I don't think this is this feels like the third big era after like the original arcade boom and the play it loud stuff. This feels like the next big era of Donkey Kong where he's just kind of everywhere. He's in movie theaters, he's at the amusement park, he's in the toy aisles, he's in video games. Like it's a good time for him.
I know, I get these comments every time I share a new piece of Donkey Kong merchandise or whatever. There's always these comments that are like, "Oh yeah, he can get merchandise, but he can't get a new game. Donkey Kong is hated by Nintendo." And then inevitably somebody will respond and say, "What about the theme park?" And they're like, "What about the theme park?" Nintendo would if Nintendo liked Donkey Kong, they would make a new Donkey Kong game.
I mean, I don't know what to tell these people. We can only say, well, they're working on a new game so many times.
Right, I know.
Like, that's on Nintendo for them to actually like show something.
Right.
So,
but again, and I hate to constantly bring up F-Zero. I'm sorry, Freezer. I'm going to bring up F-Zero. If Donkey Kong was truly despised by Nintendo, which, come on, if Nintendo had no plan, no desire to make a new Donkey Kong game at any point in the foreseeable future, there wouldn't be a theme park. It's as simple as that. And people, they'll move the goalposts and say, well, he has it because it's connected to Mario. And I'm like, all right, well then where's Yoshi's Island? Where's Wario's Woods? I don't fucking know.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's also not being branded as part of the Mario section of the park. It's its own branded section, Donkey Kong Country.
Well,
but
these people don't know how amusement parks work. They don't understand.
These people, I tells ya. So yeah, we can only say so many times on the conversation that Nintendo is probably still working on the new Donkey Kong game.
Yeah, that's fair. We haven't heard it. Well, I haven't heard anything in a while. I don't know about Hyle.
I haven't heard it. No, I've been open that I haven't heard anything in a while. All the sources that could have ferried me information have dried up because...
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, you only get so far, and, I'm not going to start making up stuff to placate our audience who are desperate for news. I'm desperate for news on the new Donkey
who do you think we are, Kotaku?
No, because then they would say, here's some new updates on the next damn Donkey Kong game.
What if it's just called that? The next damn Donkey Kong game?
I would love that.
Another, getting back to edginess.
I would fucking love if it was called Another Damn Donkey Kong Country.
This has been a File 2 production.
Que rico.